Welcome to another deep dive, and today we're going to be tackling something a little bit sensitive.
Huh?
It's this idea of how Islamic scripture is interpreted when it comes to the idea of wife beating.
Right.
I know this might seem controversial right off the bat,
Yeah.
but we're here to explore different viewpoints within Islamic thought
Uh-huh.
with respect and nuance,
Of course.
and we're going to be using the source that you provided as our guide.
Great.
We're going to uncover some surprising things, I think, about the language that's used.
Interesting.
Look at verses from the Quran and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad,
Okay.
and hopefully you'll walk away with a deeper,
Yeah.
more informed understanding of this really complex issue.
I think that's a great goal and a great way to frame this whole discussion.
Yeah.
It's not about taking sides or
No.
anything like that, but just, examining the perspectives that are out there.
For sure.
What exists within Islamic tradition.
Absolutely. And our source kind of dives headfirst into this whole debate by focusing on a particular verse in the Quran.
Okay.
It's 4.34, which is often brought up in these discussions.
Right.
And it talks about men being protectors and maintainers of women. But then it says that, if a wife shows ill conduct,
Right.
the husband should first talk to her,
Okay.
then refuse to share her bed,
Right.
and then finally beat her.
Yeah, and that's where things get really interesting.
Wouldn't you say?
It is interesting how this verse has sparked so much debate.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the source makes a really thought-provoking point about the Arabic word daraba, which is often translated as beat.
Right.
They point out that it actually has multiple meanings.
Okay, so walk me through this. What else could daraba mean?
Well, the source gives examples from other verses in the Quran where daraba means to leave or to go abroad.
Interesting.
It's fascinating how a single word can have such different interpretations,
Yeah.
depending on the context.
So if we apply that to verse 4.34,
Right.
it could be suggesting separation or even a temporary time apart as a way to work through marital conflict instead of physical violence.
Exactly. And the source strengthens this argument by pointing out that the same chapter of the Quran,
Okay.
chapter 4,
Uh-huh.
uses a word derived from daraba
Mm-hmm.
in verse 94,
Okay.
where it clearly means to go abroad.
That's a pretty compelling point.
Yeah.
So the source is essentially saying, look, if the same root word can have these different meanings within the same chapter,
Right.
maybe we shouldn't be so quick to assume it means beating in verse 4.34.
Exactly.
But they don't stop there, do they?
No, they don't.
They bring in a whole bunch of other verses and sayings
Yeah.
that seem to directly forbid harming women.
It's like they're building a case,
Yeah.
They highlight verses like 2.231, which prohibits men from holding on to their wives just to cause them harm.
Right.
And then there's these really powerful sayings
Yeah.
from the Prophet Muhammad himself.
Like the one where he emphasizes providing for your wife and not speaking badly of her.
Yes. And the one about women being created from a rib,
Right.
highlighting their delicate nature and the need to treat them with kindness.
Those sayings really paint a very different picture.
They do, don't they?
Yeah.
It seems like the emphasis in these teachings is all about respect, understanding, and avoiding harm at all costs.
Totally. And it makes you wonder how those ideas can coexist with the interpretation of 4.34 that allows for physical punishment.
Right, and that's a really important point to consider.
Yeah.
It's not just about general kindness, though.
Okay.
The source also brings up verses that are incredibly specific about protecting women's rights and well-being.
Okay.
They mention verse 4.19, which forbids forcing women into inheritance against their will or treating them harshly.
And there's that beautiful verse 30.21, which talks about how the purpose of marriage is to find tranquility and peace with your spouse.
Those are powerful examples,
They are.
and they raise a crucial question. If the goal is peace and harmony within a marriage, how could violence ever be the answer?
That's a really good point. It almost seems like a contradiction.
It does, doesn't it?
You have these verses emphasizing kindness, respect, and women's rights.
Right.
Yet you have this other verse that some interpret as allowing for physical discipline.
Yeah, it seems like the source is trying to reconcile these seemingly conflicting ideas.
Yeah, for sure. And to further explore that, the source moves on to focus on the Islamic emphasis on anger management.
Okay.
There are numerous sayings from the Prophet Muhammad
Right.
highlighting the importance of controlling your anger. Like that story where a man repeatedly asks the Prophet for advice, and every time the Prophet simply responds, "Do not become angry."
It's a powerful message.
That one always stuck with me.
It seems like controlling your anger, not letting it get the best of you, is a fundamental principle in Islam.
Totally.
Not just within marriage, but in all aspects of life.
Which makes you wonder how that principle can be applied when it comes to resolving conflict within a marriage.
Yeah, that's a good question.
The source then takes us to a whole other level by bringing up sayings that specifically forbid striking the face.
Interesting.
Even when disciplining someone.
Okay.
And that raises a fascinating question. If striking the face is forbidden, wouldn't that apply to wives as well?
It would seem so.
Wouldn't that contradict the interpretation of 4.34 as allowing for some form of physical discipline?
That's a good point.
It would seem so right, but the source does address this, suggesting that those sayings might be referring specifically to disciplining children, not wives. It's definitely a bit of a gray area, but I think it's worth exploring further.
I think it highlights the complexity of interpreting religious texts.
Yeah.
Especially when dealing with sensitive topics like this.
That's for sure.
It's not always black and white.
Right.
There are nuances and different perspectives, and it requires careful consideration.
Speaking of interpretations and sometimes jumping to conclusions, let's talk about what the source calls the sawak misconception. You know the idea that the Prophet Muhammad allowed striking a wife with a swak?
Right.
Which is like a toothbrush-like tool?
Yeah, I've heard of that.
It's something I've heard before, and I'm sure many of our listeners have too.
It's common misconception.
Yeah.
And the source does a great job debunking it.
Okay.
Pointing out that this saying doesn't actually come from the Prophet Muhammad himself.
Oh.
But from a later scholar, Imam Shafi.
It's amazing how these misconceptions can spread and become so ingrained in people's understanding of a topic.
It really emphasizes the importance of going back to the primary sources.
Yes.
Questioning assumptions and being careful about attributing sayings to figures without proper verification.
Right.
We have to be diligent researchers and critical thinkers, especially when it comes to sensitive topics like this.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So after meticulously building this case with linguistic analysis supporting verses and even tackling common misconceptions, the source finally lays out its main argument.
And what's that?
They argue that a nonviolent interpretation of 4.34 is not only supported by Islamic teachings, but is also more practical and effective for resolving marital disputes. So it's about finding solutions that promote harmony and respect within a marriage rather than resorting to any form of violence.
Right.
They're advocating for a more peaceful, compassionate approach. What stands out to you from all of this?
Well, what I find most compelling is how the source weaves together all these different pieces of evidence.
Okay.
The nuances of the language, the verses from the Quran, the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, to create a comprehensive and nuanced argument. It's not just about looking at one verse in isolation.
Right.
It's about understanding the bigger picture, seeing how all these pieces fit together.
That's such a great point. It's like putting together a puzzle, isn't it?
It is.
You have all these individual pieces, and it's about seeing how they connect to form a complete picture.
Exactly. And I think this deep dive has definitely given us a lot of pieces to consider.
It has. So to recap what we've covered so far, we started with this potentially controversial verse 4.34.
Right.
And explored how the word often translated as beat could actually have a completely different meaning. We then delved into a whole range of verses from the Quran and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad that emphasize kindness, respect, and the prohibition of harming women in any way.
We did.
We talked about the importance of controlling your anger, debunked that sawak myth, and ultimately we saw how a non-violent interpretation of 4.34 aligns with those broader Islamic teachings and offers a more practical and ethical approach to resolving conflict within a marriage.
It's been quite a journey so far.
It absolutely has. But we're not done yet. We still have a lot to unpack and explore.
I'm ready for more.
Me too.
Yeah, it really has been a thought-provoking exploration so far.
Yeah.
And what's especially fascinating to me is how this deep dive connects to a much larger conversation. About interpreting religious texts in general.
That's a great point. We can't just take these ancient texts at face value, can we?
Right.
We have to consider the historical context, the nuances of the language, the different layers of meaning. It's like trying to understand a joke from a different culture. Sometimes you need a little more background information to really get it.
That's such a great analogy.
Thanks.
And in the case of the Quran, it was revealed over 1,400 years ago.
Right.
The way language is used, even the cultural context, can be vastly different from how we understand things today.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much has been lost in translation over the centuries? And how can we as modern readers bridge that gap?
Right.
And truly understand the intended meaning?
That's where the real work begins.
Yeah.
And that's where I think this source is encouraging us to do, to engage with these texts critically, to consult scholars, to be open to different perspectives, and to approach these complex issues with humility and a willingness to learn.
It reminds me of something we often say on this show: knowledge is a journey, not a destination. There's always more to learn, more to uncover, more to understand. And sometimes the most enriching discoveries come from challenging our own assumptions and preconceived notions.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this particular deep dive so valuable. It's not about giving you a definitive answer, but about giving you the tools to explore this complex issue for yourself and form your own informed opinions.
It's about empowering you, the listener, to become an active participant in these conversations, not just a passive consumer of information.
Exactly.
And that brings us to a really crucial question. What does all of this mean for you, the listener?
Yeah, what does this mean for our listeners?
How does this information impact your understanding of Islam and gender relations?
I think it challenges us to consider how our own cultural biases and preconceived notions might influence the way we interpret religious texts.
Yeah, are we approaching these texts with an open mind? Or are we allowing our own prejudices to color our understanding?
That's such an important point.
It's a reminder that we should never stop learning, that we should always be willing to question our assumptions and engage in respectful dialogue, even about challenging topics like this.
For sure.
It's through those open and honest conversations that we can truly grow and expand our understanding.
And it reminds us that interpreting religious texts isn't a one-size-fits-all endeavor. Different schools of thought within Islam and within any religion, for that matter, might arrive at different conclusions, and that's okay. Diversity of thought and interpretation is a natural part of any belief system.
It's about recognizing and respecting that diversity while still upholding the core values of compassion, justice, and peace.
Those are important.
And those values should guide our interpretations and actions.
I agree.
Regardless of our individual beliefs or cultural background. So this deep dive has given you a glimpse into the complexities of interpreting Islamic scripture. It's shown you that there are multiple perspectives, different interpretations, and a lot of room for discussion and debate.
Absolutely.
But most importantly, it's hopefully sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue exploring these ideas on your own.
And as you continue your exploration, I encourage you to ask questions. To delve deeper into the sources, to engage in thoughtful discussions with others. And to always be open to new perspectives. Knowledge is most powerful when it's shared and discussed. So talk to your friends, your family, your community. Share what you've learned. Ask questions and be open to having your own views challenged.
That's what the deep dive is all about: encouraging curiosity, critical thinking, and respectful dialogue.
I like that.
We want to create a space where listeners can explore complex issues, challenge their assumptions, and expand their understanding of the world around them.
And who knows, maybe this deep dive will spark a new journey of discovery for you.
That would be amazing.
Maybe it will lead you to question your own beliefs, to learn more about different cultures and perspectives, or to simply engage in more thoughtful conversations with those around you.
I hope so.
Whatever the outcome, we hope this deep dive has been a valuable experience for you.
Me too. And as we wrap up this episode, we want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question to ponder.
Okay, I like it.
How does the information presented in this deep dive challenge or confirm your pre-existing beliefs about Islam and gender relations?
It's a really important question for all of us to consider.
We encourage you to reflect on this question, to continue your own research, and to engage in open and respectful conversations with others.
Because remember, understanding and empathy are the keys to building a more just and compassionate world.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up, in headlines and stereotypes. But taking the time to understand different perspectives, I think, can be incredibly enriching.
And sometimes it can even challenge us to re-examine our own beliefs and biases.
That's the beauty of knowledge, isn't it?
It is.
It has the power to transform us. To open our minds to new possibilities.
For sure.
And to connect us to something larger than ourselves.
It's like that saying, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Every answer leads to more questions, and that's what keeps us curious and engaged.
And that curiosity is what drives us to seek out new information, to challenge our assumptions, and to engage in meaningful dialogue with others.
Yeah.
It's what makes us lifelong learners.
And sometimes those conversations can be uncomfortable, even challenging.
They can?
But that's where the real growth happens, right?
Right.
When we're willing to step outside of our comfort zones.
I agree.
And engage with ideas that might be different from our own.
It's like exercising a muscle.
Okay.
The more we engage in those challenging conversations, the stronger our critical thinking skills become, and the better equipped we are to navigate the complexities of the world around us.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a few final thoughts to ponder.
I like it.
We've explored different interpretations of a controversial verse in the Quran.
We have.
We've examined the nuances of language.
Yes.
And the importance of context.
Right.
And we've emphasized the need for critical thinking and open dialogue.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, the most important takeaway is this knowledge is a powerful tool for change.
I agree with that.
It has the power to break down stereotypes, to foster empathy, and to build bridges of understanding between people of different cultures and beliefs.
Those are all such important things.
They are.
And things that I think we all strive for.
And that's what we hope you'll take away from this deep dive.
Okay.
A renewed sense of curiosity.
Yeah.
A commitment to respectful dialogue.
Right.
And a desire to use your knowledge to make the world a more just and compassionate place.
Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery.
Yes, thank you so much for listening, everyone.
We hope you'll continue to explore these ideas and to share what you've learned with others.
Absolutely. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here.
It doesn't.
Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep striving to make a positive difference in the world. Until next time.
Until next time.
Keep diving deep.